when the world awoke from stone. The world was silent. For tens of millennia, the earth had been shrouded in ice and wind, a desolate realm where the human story seemed frozen in time. Glaciers stretched across continents, grinding mountains into dust. Oceans retreated and returned like breathing gods, and somewhere between the roar of storms and the stillness of the frozen plains, our kind waited. Then, almost suddenly, the ice began to melt. Around 12,000 BCE, the planet shifted. Temperatures rose. The endless white slowly gave way to rivers, grasslands, and forests. The sound of thunder was replaced by the murmur of flowing water, and humanity, scattered in small tribes, hunters and gatherers, began to move again. But what was awakening wasn't only the land. Something ancient stirred in the human mind, a spark that would soon ignite everything we now call civilization. The earth itself seemed to remember. In Turkey's mountains, in the valleys of the Levant, in the basins of the Nile and Tigris, people began to settle. They built sanctuaries before they built cities. They carved gods before they carved tools of trade. And in that inversion of logic, worship before survival, lies the first great mystery of our species. Archaeologists call this the Neolithic Revolution, but the term feels too clinical for what really happened. Between 12,000 and 9,000 BCE, scattered human groups began to construct monuments, observatories, and ritual complexes long before the first writing or wheel appeared. They aligned stone circles with constellations, buried their dead with deliberate ceremony, and tracked the heavens as if remembering an ancient covenant between earth and sky. What could have driven such sudden sophistication? Some say necessity, a response to the changing climate. Others whisper of memory, that these people weren't discovering civilization but rebuilding it. The flood myths of later cultures, from the Sumerians to the Hebrews, all echo the same refrain: a world destroyed and a remnant who remembered. In this dawn, the boundaries between myth and archaeology blur. Sites like Göbekli Tepe, rising around 11,600 BCE, defy the linear narrative of human progress. Massive stone pillars carved with foxes, serpents, vultures, and abstract symbols stand arranged in perfect circles, the world's first known temple, older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years, and yet there are no signs of agriculture or permanent villages nearby. No pottery, no metal, only art, geometry, and devotion. Who built this? How? And perhaps more importantly, why? To mainstream archaeology, it was the work of organized hunter-gatherers, a leap of symbolic thought that foreshadowed later civilization. But others see a fragment of something far older, a cultural echo from before the ice, from a time erased by the rising seas. Plato spoke of Atlantis, a land beyond the pillars of Heracles, destroyed by floods around this same epoch. Sumerian tablets speak of antediluvian kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years. Even in the temples of Egypt, priests told Solon of an ancient world wiped clean, leaving only myths as fossils of memory. And as the waters rose, swallowing coasts and islands, perhaps the survivors moved inland to Anatolia, Mesopotamia, the Indus, and the Andes, carrying fragments of lost knowledge. Agriculture, astronomy, architecture, the sacred alignment between heaven and earth. By the time we reach the first recognizable civilizations, this memory will already have turned into myth. But here, in the soft mud of a warming planet, under skies heavy with new stars, we glimpse the beginning of everything and the end of something greater. The world awoke from stone, but it might only have been remembering what it once was. The children of the flood, survivors of a forgotten age. The flood was not a single event. It was an era, a slow and merciless drowning of the world. Between 12,900 and 9,600 BCE, as the last ice age ended, oceans surged hundreds of feet higher. Entire continents changed shape. The ancient coastlines of humanity, now buried beneath the waves, once held something we can no longer see. What happened to those people? Modern science calls it the Younger Dryas, a climatic chaos triggered perhaps by a comet impact or a sudden pulse of meltwater from collapsing ice sheets. But to ancient storytellers, it was remembered as the wrath of gods, a flood so vast that it ended an age. Nearly every civilization, from the Sumerians to the Mayans, tells of it. Ziusudra, Noah, Utnapishtim, Deucalion, Manu, all names for one archetype, the survivor. Imagine those survivors. They watched the stars shift as the Earth's poles wobbled. They saw fire rain from the sky and seas devour mountains. They saw their homes, perhaps entire nations, vanish beneath rising tides. And when the waters calmed, they emerged into a new and alien world, one that had forgotten their cities, their gods, and their stories. These were the children of the flood, the bearers of memory in an age of mud and silence. Archaeologists often dismiss such myths as exaggerations, but the evidence buried in the planet's geology speaks otherwise. At Black Sea coastlines, once dry plains now lie 300 feet underwater. Off the coasts of India, Japan, and Cuba, sonar has revealed submerged structures, patterns too geometric to be chance. Some show walls, terraces, even what seem to be roads. Each discovery hints at a lost map of human habitation, a world beneath the waves. If humanity truly rose before Mesopotamia, its remnants might not be found in deserts, but under the ocean. And then there's the question of memory. How did the first post-flood cultures, people who, according to archaeology, barely knew agriculture, suddenly demonstrate cosmic understanding? At Göbekli Tepe, stones align to the constellation of Orion and the bright star Sirius. In Jericho, one of the world's earliest cities, a tower from 8000 BCE faces the horizon where the sun sets at the summer solstice. Across thousands of miles and millennia, the same patterns repeat, the sky as sacred blueprint. Coincidence or continuity? To some researchers, this shared symbolism hints at a common origin, a forgotten global culture that once watched the heavens and built their world in its reflection. Graham Hancock and others have called it a civilization before civilization, not an empire, but a network of knowledge, fragments of which re-emerged wherever survivors settled. Every myth of wise beings descending after the flood, the Apkallu of Sumer, the Viracochas of the Andes, the seven sages of India, may describe the same phenomenon, the transmission of lost memory. Perhaps those who survived didn't just bring tools or stories. Perhaps they brought purpose. It is in this purpose, rebuilding order from ruin, that the seeds of civilization are sown. When people began to remember the stars, they began to measure time. When they honored the dead, they built the first tombs. When they watched the floodwaters recede, they learned to plant. The children of the flood were not primitive. They were the bridge. And as the world dried and warmed, they carried with them the last whispers of a vanished age, an age that would become legend, because what came next would not be the rebirth of humanity, but the reconstruction of a story that had already been told once before. The builders of light, Göbekli Tepe, and the dawn of sacred architecture. High on the limestone plateau of southeastern Anatolia, where the winds still carry the scent of dust and age, rises a hill that should never have existed. Beneath its surface lies a construction so ancient, so deliberate, that it rewrote everything archaeology once believed about humanity's beginnings. This place is Göbekli Tepe, Potbelly Hill, a name far too humble for what may be the oldest temple complex on Earth. Discovered in the mid-1990s by German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, Göbekli Tepe forced history to look in the mirror. Beneath layers of sediment, Schmidt's team unearthed massive T-shaped stone pillars, each weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in circular enclosures and carved with animals, foxes, vultures, scorpions, snakes. The carvings were not random decorations. They were symbols, a visual language older than writing. And the radiocarbon dates stunned the world. Around 9500 to 11600 BCE, long before the invention of pottery, the wheel, or agriculture. According to the accepted narrative, humans of that time were simple hunter-gatherers, moving constantly in search of food. Yet here they quarried, transported, and erected monoliths with mathematical precision. Why would a nomadic people build a temple larger than anything seen again for thousands of years? Schmidt believed Göbekli Tepe was a pilgrimage center, a sanctuary built not for living, but for remembering. He noted something extraordinary. The site was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE, as if its builders had chosen to hide it, to preserve it for a future they would never see. But the deeper question is, who taught them how to do this? The site's architecture follows principles of alignment and symmetry that suggest an awareness of celestial cycles. The main pillars in enclosure D seem oriented toward the rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. Others align with the constellation Orion, the same cosmic hunter that later guided Egyptian pyramids and Mayan temples. Was this coincidence, or evidence of an ancient astronomical tradition, a science passed down from a forgotten age? Some researchers, like engineer Robert Schoch and author Graham Hancock, propose that Göbekli Tepe was not the beginning of civilization, but a continuation of one that had perished in the cataclysmic floods of the Younger Dryas. To them, the builders were heirs of a lost knowledge, reconstructing sacred patterns they barely remembered. The serpents carved on the stones, the vultures carrying spheres, the enigmatic humanoid forms, all could be symbolic echoes of the destruction and rebirth of the world. Even mainstream archaeologists admit Göbekli Tepe came too early. Agriculture, thought to be the foundation of complex society, appears after the temple. That reversal defies logic. Religion before farming, architecture before villages. It suggests that the spiritual impulse, not survival, was humanity's first architect. The builders of Göbekli Tepe didn't gather to hunt. They gathered to commune. Perhaps they were rebuilding a cosmic order, a map of the heavens on Earth, designed to remind their descendants of what had been lost. Each pillar, a guardian, each circle, a calendar, each animal, a memory of an ancient covenant between man and nature. And then, almost as mysteriously as it appeared, it was buried. Who buried it, and why, remains unsolved. Was it a ritual of closure? A farewell to a world slipping into forgetfulness? Or did the survivors know something? A coming danger, another flood, another reset, and choose to protect their sacred archive under layers of earth? If Göbekli Tepe was the world's first temple, it may also have been the first time capsule. A message carved in stone for the future. A record of memory that refused to die. As we stand upon its buried sanctuaries today, we are not just looking at ruins. We are looking at the fingerprints of a mind older than history, the first civilization of light emerging from the shadow of the flood. But Göbekli Tepe was not alone. Across the world, other sites, equally mysterious and impossibly old, began to rise, as if responding to the same forgotten call. Because while one people carved their sky into stone, others, thousands of miles away, were beginning their own sacred architectures, ones that would one day connect across oceans and time. The global code, parallels across continents. If Göbekli Tepe was humanity's first whisper after silence, then what followed was an echo that circled the world. From the deserts of Anatolia to the jungles of South America, from the Indus Valley to the islands of the Pacific, there emerged, almost simultaneously, a language of stone, geometry, and sky. A language so consistent, so eerily familiar across continents, that one must ask, were these the independent inventions of distant tribes, or fragments of one forgotten blueprint? Archaeology tells us that after Göbekli Tepe, human settlements began to flourish across the Fertile Crescent. Jericho, Çatalhöyük, and later, the early towns along the Euphrates and Nile all show signs of sudden cultural sophistication, organized layouts, shrines, artwork, and communal rituals. Yet at the same time, across oceans humanity wasn't yet supposed to have crossed, we see mirror images of the same ideas. Consider Caral in Peru's Supe Valley. Radiocarbon dating places it at around 2600 BCE, older than the pyramids of Egypt. Its central platform, circular plazas, and stepped pyramids bear striking resemblance to Mesopotamian ziggurats. No written record connects the two. Yet both civilizations arrange their sacred centers to mirror constellations, aligning their monuments with the solstices. Both revered the sky as a source of divine order. Both built from the same grammar of form, the circle and the square, heaven and earth. How could such symmetry appear on opposite sides of the planet, millennia before transoceanic travel was possible? Skeptics attribute it to coincidence, that geometry, being universal, would naturally repeat. But coincidence becomes unlikely when one traces not only architectural patterns, but mythological ones. Flood stories, sky gods descending to teach agriculture, serpent deities guarding forbidden knowledge. Across continents and eras, these motifs are not only similar, they are identical. In Bolivia's Tiwanaku, legends speak of Viracocha, the bearded god who emerged from the sea after a flood to teach humanity. In Sumer, the Apkallu sages did the same, half fish, half man, emerging from the waters to restore civilization. In India, Matsya, the fish incarnation of Vishnu, rescues the seeds of life from a deluge and delivers them to a mountain peak. The symbolism of water, rebirth, and divine instruction transcends geography and language. It feels less like invention and more like recollection. If we step back far enough, a pattern emerges, a global code woven into humanity's earliest sacred architecture. Circles, pyramids, and solar alignments mark sites from Anatolia to the Andes, from Egypt to Easter Island. Even their mathematical constants, the obsession with the number 72, the precession of the equinoxes, the golden ratio, echo across civilizations that supposedly had no contact with one another. Was this an unconscious convergence, or the survival of a primordial science, one that measured time in cycles of stars rather than calendars of kings? Some theorists suggest that these shared elements originate from a pre-Diluvian knowledge system, an advanced understanding of astronomy and geometry encoded symbolically. If true, then humanity's first monuments were not random acts of faith. They were instruments of memory, designed to preserve cosmic truths through stone. And it wasn't just architecture. Ancient languages themselves seem to carry this resonance. The Sumerian word Anu, the sky father, finds its echo in An, the Egyptian root for heaven, and in the pre-Columbian Anu of the Andes. Serpent symbolism, representing wisdom or rebirth, slithers through cultures from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica. The same celestial maps, the same gods under different names, all pointing toward a time when the world was smaller and its people shared a single mythic source. Archaeology, cautious by nature, calls these archetypes, but perhaps memory is more accurate. Because myths, when repeated across thousands of miles and millennia, may not be imagination, they may be transmissions. And so, as the first light of civilization spread from Anatolia to the world, it did not bring new ideas, but ancient ones rediscovered. Every temple, every ziggurat, every pyramid was a continuation, a reconstruction of the same forgotten architecture of meaning. Göbekli Tepe had been the first code carved into stone. The others would repeat it, translate it, reinterpret it, each one trying to recall the full message of a lost Genesis. But who wrote that message to begin with? Who taught the first builders to measure heaven, to carve cosmic patterns into stone, and to align their temples with the stars? The sky teachers, gods, sages, or survivors. Every origin story begins the same way. Someone arrives, not from nearby tribes, not from across rivers or mountains, but from the sky, the sea, or the stars. In every cradle of civilization, humanity's first teachers were described not as men, but as luminous beings, bringers of wisdom, agriculture, astronomy, and law. They were called gods, yet they behaved less like deities and more like instructors. In Sumer, they were the Anunnaki, those who came from heaven to earth. In Egypt, they were the Neteru, divine architects who shaped the land before the reign of mortal kings. In Mesoamerica, they were Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who taught writing and maize cultivation. In the Andes, Viracocha, the white-robed wanderer, emerged from Lake Titicaca after the flood to guide humanity. And in India, the Devas and Rishis descended upon sacred mountains to deliver cosmic knowledge. Different lands, same narrative. They appeared suddenly, elevated humankind, then vanished, promising to return. Mainstream archaeology views these as metaphors for cultural evolution, mythic personifications of natural forces. Yet when the same story repeats with such detail and global consistency, the pattern begins to resemble reportage. Could these gods have been survivors of an advanced civilization, carrying fragments of science and technology into a devastated post-flood world? The Sumerians themselves claimed they did not invent their knowledge, they inherited it. Their earliest tablets speak of antediluvian kings and sages who reigned for thousands of years before the flood. The first ruler listed in the Sumerian king list, Alulim of Eridu, is said to have descended directly from the heavens. Eridu, the first city, was founded when kingship descended from heaven. These are not metaphors. They are origin records. If humanity was restarting civilization after a global cataclysm, then such legends might preserve the memory of those who remembered what came before. Survivors who possessed navigation, mathematics, and astronomical knowledge far beyond the tribal world they entered, knowledge that would have seemed divine to those who had lost everything. Göbekli Tepe's carvings may even reflect this transmission. Among its reliefs are humanoid figures without mouths or faces, yet clearly clothed and proportioned. One central pillar, taller than the rest, displays human hands folded over the abdomen, not a depiction of a hunter, but a being of authority. These could represent the first sky teachers, not as gods, but as guides, the keepers of a secret lineage of knowledge. And the pattern repeats. Across the ocean, the Olmecs carved colossal heads with distinctly non-native features, broad-nosed, helmeted, timeless. In Egypt, the god Thoth is depicted as the inventor of writing, mathematics, and measurement, always associated with the moon, the eye, and the ibis, symbols of observation and intelligence. In Mesopotamia, Oannes, a half-human, half-fish being, emerged daily from the Persian Gulf to teach mankind before returning to the sea at night, an echo of the Sumerian Apkallu. In every story, the theme is identical. Teachers arrive from elsewhere, share sacred science, and then disappear. Could they have been travelers from the remnants of a lost civilization, one that fell beneath the seas during the Younger Dryas Cataclysms? If so, the mythic descriptions, bright auras, luminous garments, serpent forms, might be symbolic retellings of real encounters filtered through the lens of trauma and awe. To a Neolithic mind, knowledge itself was divine. The ability to measure the stars or harness agriculture would have appeared as miracles. Modern science hesitates at the idea of lost advanced civilizations, yet even cautious scholars admit humanity's timeline may be incomplete. Evidence from Bimini Road, Dwarka, and Yonaguni Monument, submerged structures aligned with ancient shorelines, suggests that our ancestors built and lost more than we can currently account for. If fragments of those people survived, guiding humanity's restart, then myth and archaeology are not opposites. They are complementary pieces of the same forgotten puzzle. Maybe the first gods were simply remembered humans, survivors whose science became legend, or perhaps, as the myths insist, they were something more, emissaries of a cosmic order, returning to restore balance after the flood. In either case, they changed everything, because after their coming, humanity would never again look at the stars with fear, but with purpose. The world had teachers once, but when they disappeared, their students were left to build monuments, stories, and faith to keep the memory alive until the gods returned. And that longing, that desire to reconnect with the source, would drive every civilization that followed. The memory keepers. From ritual to writing, civilization did not begin with cities. It began with memory. Before the plow, before the wheel, before the temple, there was the ritual. In firelight and rhythm, humanity kept the world alive through story. Each word carried remembrance. Each chant renewed the covenant between gods and men. But as centuries turned and the voices of the sky teachers faded into myth, humanity faced its greatest fear, forgetting. That fear gave birth to writing. Long before Sumer's wedge-shaped script appeared, people devised ways to capture thought in material form. On bone, clay, and stone, symbols began to replace sound. The earliest signs, tallies of grain, marks of trade, were not records of commerce, but echoes of ritual memory. They reflected cycles of seasons, phases of the moon, the passage of stars, the cosmic order inherited from their divine instructors. By 8000 BCE, clay tokens shaped like spheres, cones, and cylinders were being pressed into tablets. To the modern eye, they seem mundane. To the ancients, they were sacred signatures of continuity, each one a vessel of the invisible. This silent system would slowly evolve into proto-cuneiform, the world's first writing in Uruk, by 3200 BCE. But the transformation was not purely technological, it was spiritual. For the first time, the human mind could externalize memory, extend its reach beyond death, beyond generations. The ritual no longer needed a priest, the tablet became the priest. The word made stone. It is no coincidence that the Sumerians attributed writing to Nisaba, goddess of wisdom and scribes, herself a continuation of earlier traditions where language was divine property. In Egypt, Thoth guarded the hieroglyphs, teaching that words were magic, Heka, capable of shaping reality. The Vedic seers of India spoke of Vak, the primordial voice, through which the universe itself was spoken into being. To write, then, was to imitate creation. In every culture, scribes were initiates, not mere record keepers. They were memory keepers, custodians of cosmic order. Their duty was not only to preserve history, but to maintain harmony between heaven and earth. Each inscription was both prayer and technology, a mechanism to keep the past alive in the present. As humanity learned to inscribe knowledge, something else emerged, the sense of linear time. Until then, the world was cyclical: birth, flood, renewal, repeat. But written record forced permanence. It demanded chronology. The Sumerians began to list kings, reigns, and genealogies, the earliest attempts to anchor eternity into sequence. The very concept of history was born from the fear of losing memory. And yet, within those first texts, we glimpse something unsettling. They already remembered things too ancient to be true. The Sumerian king list speaks of 10 kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years before the flood. The Egyptian Turin Papyrus describes the reign of divine dynasties predating the pharaohs by millennia. The Maya Chilam Balam recalls previous suns, each ending in catastrophe. These were not mythic embellishments. They were the records of civilizations who still felt the shadow of a forgotten age pressing on their collective memory. Perhaps writing wasn't invented to document the present, but to resurrect the past. Through ritual and inscription, the ancients sought to re-establish contact with the lost world of their teachers. Each temple wall, each hymn, each glyph was a fragment of dialogue with eternity. Even the act of carving stone mirrored what their ancestors had once done at Göbekli Tepe, imprinting knowledge into matter to survive time's erasure. But over generations, meaning blurred, the sacred symbols turned into bureaucratic marks, and the living myths hardened into dogma. The scribes, once keepers of mystery, became servants of kings. Civilization had learned to remember, but it had also learned to control memory. Still, within the oldest scripts, the hymns, the creation tablets, the genealogies, whispers remained. Names of gods that predate nations, measurements of stars older than the supposed age of astronomy, references to floods, lost lands, and shining teachers. It was as if, deep within the clay, something ancient was trying to speak again. And if humanity could learn to read that language, the first language of time, it might rediscover not only its origins, but its destiny. For in learning to write, humanity had done more than preserve memory. It had reignited the divine spark, the same fire the sky teachers once carried across a drowned world. But where did those fires burn brightest next? To find the answer, we must travel east, to a land where myth and mathematics merged, and where the heavens themselves were measured with divine precision. The watchers of the stars, the dawn of astronomy. Long before the first city walls rose, before kings and empires, there were watchers, silent observers who studied the sky as if decoding a message written across eternity. To them, the heavens were not chaos. They were order, a divine machine of light and rhythm. Every sunrise, every solstice, every wandering planet was a heartbeat of creation itself. These early astronomers, the watchers of the stars, stood at the crossroads between myth and science. They did not separate the sacred from the measurable. For them, measuring was sacred. The arc of a constellation, the rising of a star, the tilt of the moon's shadow, each pattern held memory. It was as if the universe were whispering the same truth the sky teachers once spoke, as above, so below. Evidence of this awareness stretches far beyond Mesopotamia. In the uplands of Anatolia, the stone circles of Göbekli Tepe show alignments with the rising of Sirius around 9500 BCE, the same star later worshipped by Egyptians as the herald of the Nile's flooding. In Scotland's Callanish stones, Malta's Hypogum, and Egypt's Nabta Playa, ancient architects carved sightlines that captured solstices and equinoxes. Even Stonehenge, though much younger, echoes the same cosmic grammar. Across continents and millennia, humans built observatories not for the eyes of kings, but for the eyes of time. Why this obsession with the sky? Because the heavens were the ultimate calendar, the eternal reference against which all earthly cycles could be measured. When stars returned to the same point after long intervals, they signaled seasons, floods, migrations, and rituals. Yet these early observers noticed something more. The stars themselves drifted. Over centuries, constellations shifted slightly, as though the sky itself were moving. This slow dance, known today as the precession of the equinoxes, takes roughly 25,120 years to complete, a cycle so immense it would require generations of observation to perceive. And yet ancient cultures across the world seem to know it. The Sumerians divided the sky into 12 houses, each ruled by a zodiacal constellation, a system later refined by Babylonians and Greeks, but likely born from far older records. The number 72, the degrees of shift per 2,160 years, appears obsessively in temples from Egypt to Mexico, encoded in geometry, myth, and architecture. Coincidence? Or a remnant of a unified science of the stars? In Egypt, the priests of Heliopolis recorded the rising of Sirius, Sopdet, as the start of the year, a celestial clock linking heaven and flood. The Dendera zodiac, carved thousands of years later, still echoes those same cosmic calculations. In Mesopotamia, the path of Anu described the celestial equator with mathematical precision. In India, The nakshatras, or lunar mansions, mapped the moon's journey through the sky in a 27-part cycle, creating a system so advanced it still forms the backbone of Vedic astrology today. How could early humans, supposedly emerging from stone tools and survival hunts, have mapped celestial mechanics requiring millennia of continuous observation? The answer perhaps lies not in sudden genius, but in inherited knowledge, a data set passed from an older world into a new one. If the sky teachers taught humanity to read the heavens, then these monuments were the blackboards of that lost classroom. Even in mythology, the connection between heaven and knowledge is constant. The Egyptian Thoth, the Sumerian Nana, the Babylonian Enki, and the Greek Hermes all share the same domain: astronomy, mathematics, and communication with the divine. They are personifications of the watchers, those who never sleep, who guard the celestial cycles. Perhaps the ancients encoded their astronomy in myths precisely to survive future cataclysms. A story about gods and animals could endure where numbers might be lost. Thus, the zodiac, Leo the lion, Taurus the bull, Scorpio the scorpion, was not mere imagination, but a mnemonic system, a language of symbols ensuring that even if flood or fire erased civilization again, the map of the heavens would survive in story. By 5000 BCE, these star watchers had evolved into priest astronomers. In Sumer, they became the Baru, diviners who read the skies for omens but also for mathematics. In Egypt, they were the Akemuseku, those who follow the stars. Their temples doubled as observatories, their rituals as experiments. The sacred and the scientific had not yet diverged. They were one and the same. Through the eyes of these watchers, humanity learned to see time as a cycle, not a line, a truth modern science would rediscover only millennia later. To them, the cosmos was not distant. It was alive, responsive, a mirror of human destiny. The stars did not dictate fate, they recorded it. And so, as the night sky turned endlessly above, humanity began to inscribe its reflection below. From the alignment of pyramids to the orientation of temples, every structure became a dialogue with the heavens, an attempt to anchor eternity on earth. But this dialogue soon took on new dimensions. For if the heavens governed time, what of the earth itself? Beneath the soil, something vast stirred, an awareness that the planet, too, followed hidden patterns. And it was in chasing those patterns that humanity would take its next leap, the birth of geometry. The architects of the earth, geometry, power, and the hidden blueprint of civilization. When the sky was finally understood, humanity turned its gaze downward and saw that the same order above existed below. The stars moved in harmony, rivers flowed in symmetry, the human body itself mirrored cosmic ratios. To the ancient mind, this was no coincidence. It was revelation. If the universe was built upon divine proportion, then to understand that proportion was to touch the mind of the gods. Thus began the age of the architects of the earth, the builders who translated celestial order into geometry, turning chaos into civilization. The roots of this sacred science reach far beyond classical Greece. Long before Euclid, long before Pythagoras, humans were already expressing cosmic harmony through design. At Göbekli Tepe, the spacing of the central pillars follows a subtle angular rhythm, an early geometry of circles within circles. At Jericho, the tower of 8000 BCE was built with a perfect gradient spiral facing the solstitial sunset. By the time of Çatalhöyük, city layouts followed grid-like arrangements, reflecting both order and community, a symbolic echo of the celestial order observed above. But nowhere did this geometry find fuller expression than in the river valleys that would soon cradle the world's first civilizations. In Sumer, temples rose atop layered platforms, ziggurats, stairways between heaven and earth. Their dimensions followed ratios later echoed in Egypt's pyramids and Mesoamerica's step pyramids. In Egypt, the proportions of the Great Pyramid encode mathematical constants, P and the golden ratio. centuries before their formal discovery. Its base aligns perfectly to the four cardinal directions, its sides angled precisely to reflect the arc of the sun. Even more astonishing, its location lies almost exactly at the geographic center of Earth's landmass. Coincidence or design? Scholars often credit such accuracy to trial and error, yet the uniformity of these alignments across continents implies a shared blueprint, a knowledge of spherical geometry and Earth's curvature seemingly impossible for early civilizations to possess. How could pyramid builders in Egypt and Mexico, separated by oceans and millennia, both orient their monuments toward the same celestial north? Both encode astronomical ratios, both use identical platform slopes, perhaps because they were working from an older template, a geometry inherited, not invented. Ancient texts hint at this forgotten science. In Mesopotamia, the god Enki was called Lord of the Me, keeper of the divine laws that ordered both heaven and earth. Laws described not as commandments, but as formulas. In Egypt, the word for architecture, setepsesh, literally meant writing in stone. And in the Vedic world, the sacred Vastu Shastra declared that proper construction mirrored the cosmic body of Purusha, the universe personified. Geometry was not mathematics. It was the act of creation itself. At its heart lay a single principle. The world is built upon measure. To measure was to control, to manifest spirit into form. The compass and the cord, sacred tools of surveyors, were symbols of divine authority. Kings and priests alike derived their legitimacy from their ability to align temples, pyramids, and cities with the cosmos. To build correctly was to ensure balance between the worlds. Over time, this sacred geometry evolved into the foundation of all art and architecture. From the golden rectangles of Greek temples to the mandalas of India and the Nazca lines of Peru, every culture rediscovered the same ratios, as though humanity itself were remembering an ancient manual of creation. Modern science now recognizes some of these proportions in nature, in the spiral of galaxies, the growth of shells, the shape of DNA. The ancients had no microscopes or telescopes, yet somehow they mirrored these structures intuitively. It suggests that geometry was not learned, but remembered, an echo of a deeper, perhaps universal intelligence within the human psyche. The builders of antiquity understood something we have long forgotten, that the act of construction was sacred dialogue. A temple was not merely a building, it was an equation. Its stones spoke with the stars. Its shadows traced the dance of the sun. When the priest walked through its corridors, he was retracing the geometry of creation itself. But if geometry was the key to manifesting divine order on earth, it also became a tool of power. Those who mastered it could shape cities, calendars, even empires. The same principles that aligned temples would later define kingship, law, and social hierarchy. Knowledge of measure became knowledge of control. From the cosmic to the political, geometry was destiny. And so, as these ancient architects continued their work, they were not merely building monuments, they were rebuilding the memory of a lost world, encoding its principles into stone so it could never be erased again. Yet geometry, like memory, is not static. It evolves. And as these early civilizations grew, their architecture became not only symbolic but monumental, expressions of divine authority that sought to bridge the human and the eternal. The next age would bring the culmination of this quest, the birth of sacred kingship, when rulers themselves became embodiments of cosmic order. The divine kings, when rulers became gods. Once, the stars were ruled by gods and the earth by men. But somewhere between the temples of Sumer and the tombs of Egypt, that boundary dissolved. The king became the bridge, the living axis connecting heaven, earth, and the underworld. His throne was not a seat of politics, it was a symbol of alignment. His crown, a miniature cosmos, The first civilizations did not invent monarchy, they inherited it. The earliest Sumerian texts declare, when kingship descended from heaven, it was established in Eridu. This phrase, inscribed on the Sumerian king list, marks the beginning of recorded history. Yet even here, history begins with something descending, not evolving. The idea of kingship came not from within humanity, but from beyond it. Those early kings, Alulim, Alalgar, Enmenlu-Ana, were said to have ruled for thousands of years before the Great Flood. To modern eyes, such lifespans seem mythic, but to the ancients, they were literal. These kings were the shepherds of humanity, chosen by the gods to restore order after chaos. They were not divine by birth, but by function. They embodied the same geometry that structured the heavens. In Egypt, the pattern repeats. The pharaoh was not merely a ruler. He was the Horus in life and Osiris in death, the sun incarnate whose heartbeat kept the Nile in rhythm. Every ceremony, every alignment of the pyramid fields reinforced this principle, that the state itself was an image of the cosmos. The Great Pyramid, aligned with the pole star and the Orion belt, served not only as a tomb but as a resurrection machine, guiding the king's soul back to the stars from which kingship first descended. To govern was to maintain Ma'at, divine balance. If a ruler failed, droughts came, stars faltered, and chaos returned. Thus, political failure was not incompetence, it was cosmic disorder. Across the world, the same archetype arose. In the Indus Valley, rulers were depicted not with crowns but in meditative poses, embodying the union of human and divine order. In pre-Columbian America, the Inca emperor, the Sapa Inca, was called Son of the Sun, descended from Viracocha's celestial lineage. In China's early dynasties, the emperor ruled by the mandate of heaven, his virtue maintaining harmony between realms. Even in later myths, like those of Greece, the demigods, Perseus, Heracles, and others, are echoes of this same figure, half human, half divine, embodying the balance between mortality and the eternal. This is no accident. It reflects a universal inheritance, a memory of an age when leadership was inseparable from cosmic alignment. To ancient eyes, the world itself was a temple, and the king its high priest. He did not rule over his people. He ruled for the cosmos, maintaining the rhythm that allowed seasons to turn and civilizations to endure. Yet kingship was more than ritual. It encoded a sophisticated understanding of social geometry, the structure of order. Just as temples mirrored celestial harmony, societies mirrored the proportions of the universe. Hierarchy as reflection of cosmic layers. The king was the central pillar, the axis mundi, around which the world revolved. The Sumerians called this alignment Mi, the divine decrees, laws of existence that shaped everything from architecture to ethics. To hold kingship was to embody these laws physically, to become a living compass. It was here that humanity's understanding of power transformed. Before, power was collective, the shared memory of tribes. After kingship descended, power became centralized, symbolized, and eternalized in stone. The ziggurats of Ur, the pyramids of Giza, and the royal tombs of China all tell the same story. Mankind's attempt to fix heaven upon earth through the figure of one divine ruler. But such sacred power was fragile. If the king represented cosmic harmony, his death threatened it. Thus, mortuary cults arose, elaborate rituals to ensure continuity beyond death. Egypt perfected this, the body preserved, the soul guided through the underworld, the monuments aligned with the imperishable stars. To the Egyptians, the pharaoh's resurrection was not mere afterlife. It was a cosmic necessity, a reenactment of creation itself. Over time, this concept evolved into the foundation of law, art, and even morality. From Sumer to Babylon, from Egypt to China, the king's justice was not personal. It was mathematical. Balance, proportion, geometry applied to ethics. The very word cosmos means order, and it was the king's sacred duty to maintain it. And yet, buried within these grand hierarchies lies a paradox. For if kingship descended from heaven, who sent it? Who first crowned mankind with divine authority? The myths remain silent or deliberately obscure. But in every culture there lingers a warning that when kings forgot their celestial origin and ruled for themselves, the gods withdrew and the world fell into darkness. Perhaps that is why so many ancient texts speak of cycles, of divine ages rising and falling, of kings who ruled as gods until pride broke the order. When heaven turned away, humanity was left with the shell of kingship, authority without wisdom, geometry without soul. And so began the long descent, the slow unraveling of that sacred bond between the human and the divine. The monuments still stood, but their meaning faded. The temples remained, but their songs fell silent. And the heavens, once seen as allies, became distant again, silent witnesses to a world that had forgotten why it was built. But this forgetting would not last forever, for even as darkness crept over the ancient world, there were those who refused to let the memory die. The priests, astronomers, and architects who guarded the remnants of the lost science, the keepers of the hidden flame, priests, initiates, and the secret continuity of knowledge. When the first empires began to crumble, not all was lost. Though temples fell and dynasties dissolved, a quiet rebellion took root, not of swords, but of memory. Those who had once served as astronomers, architects, and ritualists withdrew from the courts of kings and retreated into mystery. They became the keepers of the hidden flame, the inheritors of a science too sacred for the unworthy and too dangerous for the ambitious. History remembers them only in fragments, as priests, magi, druids, and sages. But in truth, they were the living archives of an unbroken chain stretching back to the world before the flood. From Mesopotamia to Egypt, from the Indus to the Andes, these guardians formed the first initiatic orders. Their temples became schools, their rituals became encryption, their myths became mathematics wrapped in allegory. Every ceremony, every procession, every symbol carved into the stone of pyramids or temples was not mere devotion. It was a language of numbers, stars, and geometry, designed to conceal as much as it revealed. The ancient world was full of light for those who could see it. In Egypt, the priests of Heliopolis preserved the mysteries of Ra, the cycles of the sun as mirrors of human consciousness. At Thebes, the cult of Amun guarded texts describing the hidden one, the unseen force behind all creation, ideas that would later echo in Greek philosophy and Christian mysticism. The House of Life, per Ankh, in every temple, served as an archive where scribes copied sacred books by hand, ensuring that even when empires fell, knowledge would not. To these priests, ignorance was not sin, it was extinction. The Babylonian magi followed similar traditions, blending astronomy with ritual. Their ziggurats were not only temples but observatories, where priests tracked planets, eclipses, and omens, the mathematical heartbeats of gods. In Persia, the Magi of Zoroaster maintained the doctrine of cosmic duality, the eternal battle between light and darkness, order and chaos. Their fire altars symbolized the same eternal flame that flickered in every mystery school thereafter, from Alexandria to the monasteries of the Middle Ages. Further east, in the Indus Valley and Vedic India, sages known as rishis encoded cosmology in hymns, preserving ancient star knowledge within mantras and meter. In the Andes, priest astronomers aligned temples to the solstice, continuing the same practice seen at Göbekli Tepe and Giza. Even across the seas in Polynesia, navigators memorized star paths as sacred chants. Oral astronomy passed down for millennia. Everywhere, the pattern repeats. Hidden continuity beneath apparent collapse. The fall of kingdoms did not erase the flame, it only forced it underground. As centuries passed, the priesthoods themselves evolved into mystery schools. In Egypt, The initiate underwent symbolic death and rebirth within the dark halls of temples like Dendera and Abydos, a reenactment of Osiris's dismemberment and resurrection. In Greece, the Eleusinian mysteries echoed this same cycle. In Babylon, the rites of Ishtar and Tammuz mirrored the death and return of the god, metaphors for celestial procession and human transcendence. Knowledge had become esoteric, hidden not out of arrogance but out of protection. The wisdom of the stars and the geometry of the earth were too easily weaponized by those who sought power rather than harmony. Thus, secrecy became the last refuge of truth. The symbols, veiled in myth, could survive even under the eyes of conquerors. Even when empires burned, when the Library of Alexandria was reduced to ash, when temples were plundered, when the old gods were outlawed, the initiates adapted. They embedded the flame into new traditions, new languages, Hermeticism, Kabbalah, alchemy, each a coded descendant of that primordial science. The words changed, but the geometry did not. To the uninitiated, the temple was a place of prayer. To the initiate, it was a machine of enlightenment, calibrated to harmonize body and cosmos. Every corridor, every echo, every shaft of light at solstice served a precise function. The ancient priest was not only a spiritual guide, he was a physicist, an engineer, a psychologist. Their goal was simple but immense: to preserve the original harmony between heaven and earth, spirit and matter, because they knew, as the myths had always warned, that if humanity ever forgot this harmony, the world itself would fall back into chaos. And yet, secrecy had its price. With each generation, symbols became riddles, and riddles became superstition. The light dimmed, flickering through coded texts and misunderstood rituals. By the time Greece and Rome rose, only fragments of the ancient flame remained visible, enough to inspire awe, but too little to reconstruct the full design. Still, somewhere beneath the visible history, the chain endured. Hidden within priesthoods, secret brotherhoods, and the whispered lines of forbidden books, the knowledge survived, waiting for the next awakening, when the earth would once again remember its origins. Because civilization, like the stars it once worshipped, moves in cycles, and though the flame dimmed, it was never extinguished. The priests knew this, the architects suspected it, and the myths, the oldest records of all, promised it, that one day the cycle would turn again. The Great Forgetting, the fall of the ancient order civilization, did not collapse in a single moment. It dimmed, slowly, imperceptibly, like a star fading behind the horizon. One generation after another, the memory of the world before the flood, the wisdom of the sky teachers, the geometry of creation, all began to fragment. The keepers of the hidden flame still guarded the remnants, but their voices grew faint against the roar of empires. Humanity was entering the age of the Great Forgetting. By the 3rd millennium BCE, the great centers of learning, Sumer, Egypt, the Indus, had reached extraordinary heights. Cities gleamed with temples, canals, and libraries. Mathematics, writing, astronomy, all thrived. But the purpose had shifted. What was once sacred science became statecraft. The geometry that once aligned temples with the stars now measured taxation and borders. The priests who once interpreted cosmic law now served the will of kings. In Sumer, the language of the gods hardened into administrative cuneiform. Tablets that once sang hymns to the heavens now recorded shipments of barley and bronze. In Egypt, the priesthood grew powerful, but insular, guarding knowledge not to preserve harmony, but to preserve privilege. The pyramids ceased, the rituals became hollow, and the divine kingship that had once reflected cosmic order turned into dynastic politics. And in the Indus Valley, the great cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro fell silent under unknown catastrophe, their writing never to be deciphered, their memory swallowed by dust. The sacred connection between heaven and earth, once the heartbeat of civilization, weakened. Humanity began to mistake technology for wisdom and ritual for faith. And yet, even in their decline, the ancients left warnings. The Sumerians spoke of Namtar, the god of fate, who records every human act, a metaphor for the cycles of cause and consequence. The Egyptians warned that when Ma'at, truth, order, balance, was forgotten, Isfet, the force of chaos, would return. The Mayans told of previous ages destroyed because mankind grew arrogant and deaf to the will of the cosmos. Every culture knew that forgetting was not ignorance, it was a fall from grace. By the second millennium BCE, the torch of civilization began to pass westward. New empires rose. Babylon, Assyria, Mycenae, the Hittites, each inheriting fragments of older knowledge. But fragments are dangerous. Without context, they breed superstition. Astrology replaced astronomy. Idolatry replaced symbolism. Rituals became repetition without understanding. The Magi, once masters of celestial mechanics, devolved into fortune-tellers. The scribes of Egypt, once architects of cosmic alignment, became record-keepers for bureaucracy. And the great archives, those of Eridu, of Nineveh, of Heliopolis, burned or crumbled, taking with them the maps of time. This was not merely cultural decay, it was a psychological amnesia, a loss of connection between the outer and the inner cosmos. For millennia, humans had seen themselves as reflections of the universe, each heartbeat a microcosm of creation. But now they saw themselves as separate, superior, masters of the world rather than its stewards. Power replaced wisdom, fear replaced awe. And so, civilization entered its adolescence, brilliant, ambitious, and forgetful. Still, a few resisted the tide. In Egypt, the priesthood of Aten briefly tried to restore the ancient unity, a single solar god embodying all light, under Pharaoh Akhenaten. In Mesopotamia, scholars at Babylon compiled the Enuma Elish, preserving fragments of older creation myths. In Greece, a new language of reason and philosophy would later attempt to rediscover, through logic, what the ancients once knew through intuition. But these were aftershocks of a much older earthquake. The real wisdom, the knowledge of cycles, the harmonics of the earth, the living geometry, was fading from human grasp. The flame still burned, but behind closed doors. In secret chambers of temples, in the libraries of initiates, in the coded verses of sacred texts, a handful of guardians refused to let the light die. They encoded the lost knowledge in myth, embedding cosmology within legends of gods and heroes, astronomy within epic poetry, mathematics within sacred art. To the untrained eye, these were stories. To the initiated, they were maps. The Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, hides star patterns in its narrative structure. The Book of the Dead doubles as a manual for both spiritual and astronomical navigation. Even the Greek myths, Zeus, Apollo, Hermes, are echoes of cosmic forces, not merely divine characters. The keepers had learned one crucial truth: history forgets facts, but it remembers stories. And so, through story, the ancient world preserved itself, waiting for a future civilization capable of reading its symbols once more. But before that rediscovery could happen, the great forgetting had to run its full course. The ancient order would have to collapse entirely, its temples buried, its languages lost, its truths scattered across time, and out of that darkness a new world would rise, one that thought itself the first. The rebirth of darkness, the rise of empires and the lost light. Out of the ruins of the great forgetting rose something powerful, but not wise. The embers of sacred knowledge, once used to align man with the cosmos, were now wielded to align armies and empires. The flame had not gone out, it had been captured. By the second millennium BCE, the old priest kings of Sumer and Egypt had given way to conquerors, rulers who no longer sought to embody heaven but to own it. Babylon, Assyria, Persia, Greece, and Rome, the great empires of the classical age, all inherited fragments of the primordial science. But like broken shards of a mirror, they reflected only pieces of the original image. They remembered the geometry, the calendar, the rituals, but forgot why they existed. And so began the rebirth of darkness, an age brilliant in art and war but blind in spirit. In Babylon, the ziggurats still reached toward the stars, yet their purpose had shifted. The Etemenanki, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth, became a tower of domination, the legendary Tower of Babel. Once a stairway for communion with the gods, it turned into a monument of human pride. The myth of Babel, though later moralized by scripture, hides an older truth. Humanity's attempt to rebuild heaven without harmony, to recreate divine architecture without divine intent. The same pattern unfolded in Egypt's later dynasties. The pyramids, once cosmic machines of resurrection, became symbols of dynastic ego. The temples of Karnak and Luxor echoed ancient alignments, but their rituals had become performances, disconnected from the original understanding of cosmic resonance. Pharaohs still called themselves sons of Ra, but the gods no longer answered. In the East, the Persian Magi preserved mathematical astronomy, mapping planetary orbits and predicting eclipses. Yet even there, the science had become utilitarian, a means to justify empire, to time wars and coronations, rather than to harmonize man with the cosmos. The same priests who once read the heavens now read omens for kings. And then came Greece, the civilization modern history calls the birthplace of reason. Yet much of Greek philosophy was not invention, but reconstruction, the effort to translate older wisdom into a new tongue. Pythagoras, Plato, and Thales all traveled to Egypt and Babylon, returning with fragments of that ancient flame. Their writings are echoes of teachings millennia older, the harmony of the spheres, the geometry of being, the immortal soul. But by then, these truths were already abstractions, stripped of their ritual context. What was once lived experience became theory. Rome completed the transformation. Where Sumer had temples, Rome built law. Where Egypt had geometry, Rome had engineering. Order became control. Knowledge became infrastructure. The sacred sciences, astronomy, medicine, architecture, were reduced to tools of empire. In the hands of generals and emperors, the geometry of the gods became the geometry of conquest. And yet, even amid this darkness disguised as progress, sparks of the old light remained. Mystery cults flourished in secret. The Orphics, the Mithraists, the Hermetics. In hidden chambers beneath the marble of Rome, initiates reenacted ancient rites, descending into darkness, emerging into light. They remembered the cycles, the floods, the eternal return. To them, empire was not destiny, it was decay. Meanwhile, in Babylon's libraries, scribes still copied fragments of forgotten tablets. One of these, the Enuma Elish, preserved the memory of a time before the gods of war, when creation itself was seen as song and number. In Alexandria, scholars attempted the impossible, to reunite the broken mirror. Mathematicians, philosophers, and mystics gathered texts from Egypt, Sumer, India, and beyond, seeking the common origin of all wisdom. For a brief moment, the flame flickered bright again, but darkness does not tolerate remembrance. When the Library of Alexandria burned, whether by accident or decree, the last unified archive of the ancient world vanished. With it, centuries of accumulated knowledge, astronomical records, geometry, histories of forgotten lands, turned to ash. It was as though the universe itself had chosen to erase its own memory. The following centuries would mistake this destruction for progress. Empires rose and fell, faiths battled for supremacy, new gods replaced old names. But beneath every creed, the same symbols remained: the serpent, the sun, the star, the flood, the rebirth. Humanity was repeating a script it no longer understood. The old sages had warned of this. They said the flame could not die, only hide. And indeed, while the great powers of the world warred and decayed, a secret continuity endured. Through philosophers in Greece, mystics in Persia, and alchemists in Egypt's hidden sanctuaries, they whispered that the true temple was not stone or empire, but the mind itself, a reflection of the cosmos waiting to awaken. The ancient order had fallen, but its seed survived, and that seed would germinate again, far from the empires of men, in forgotten manuscripts and hidden brotherhoods, waiting for a world ready to remember. For history moves not in lines, but in spirals. And as the spiral turns, the darkness of forgetting always gives birth to the light of rediscovery. The fire beneath the ashes, the hidden survival of ancient knowledge. When the library of Alexandria burned, many believed the ancient light had died. But fire is a strange teacher. It destroys what is seen and frees what is unseen. From the ashes of temples and scrolls rose a new kind of flame. Invisible, nomadic, and indestructible. It lived not in monuments but in minds. Across the fading world of empires, whispers moved like wind between ruins. Priests disguised as philosophers, astronomers posing as poets, alchemists hiding theology in their chemistry. These were the new keepers of the hidden flame, heirs to a lineage that had begun long before writing, carrying the fragments of a memory older than the flood. After the fall of Egypt's last native dynasty, the torch of wisdom passed into the hands of wanderers, the Hermetic adepts, followers of Thoth, whom the Greeks called Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great. In the scrolls attributed to him, the Corpus Hermeticum, ancient cosmology re-emerged disguised as philosophy. As above, so below, the text declared, the same axiom that once guided the architects of Göbekli Tepe and Giza. The universe, it taught, was a living mind, and man, its reflection. The divine geometry still pulsed beneath the surface of language. Meanwhile, in Babylon, Persia, and Greece, fragments of Mesopotamian astronomy endured. The Chaldeans continued to track planetary cycles with uncanny precision, encoding their findings in the newly born science of astrology. To them, it was not superstition, but remembrance, the rediscovery of the cosmic harmonies the ancients once lived by. And though empires mocked them, their calculations would become the foundation of modern astronomy. In Alexandria, before its final destruction, a last generation of scholars gathered the remnants. Men like Ptolemy, Plotinus, and Hypatia studied not to dominate nature, but to understand its language. They saw mathematics, music, and geometry as spiritual disciplines, echoes of the same cosmic ratios once carved in stone. Their academy was a temple without idols, a continuation of the world's oldest sanctuary, now disguised as philosophy. But the flame could not remain in one place. When the world fractured under Rome's decline, it scattered eastward and westward, finding refuge in unlikely lands. In Persia, it blended with Zoroastrian dualism and gave birth to alchemy, a science of transformation that mirrored both matter and spirit. The alchemists' furnaces were microcosms of creation, reenacting the moment when divine order emerged from chaos. In India, the Vedic tradition continued unbroken, preserving the cosmic cycles, the yugas, that mirrored the precession of the heavens. In China, Taoist sages mapped energy meridians within the body, reflecting the geometry of rivers and stars, another expression of as above, so below. Even as Christianity, Islam, and later Orthodoxy reshaped the known world, the hidden current persisted beneath their surfaces. Early Christian mystics, like the Gnostics of Egypt and Syria, reinterpreted Genesis as cosmic allegory. The seven heavens, the divine spark within man, the fall into matter, all were ancient ideas given new form. Islamic scholars, centuries later, would preserve Greek and Egyptian mathematics in the House of Wisdom at Baghdad, ensuring the sacred numbers survived when Europe slept in darkness. By the time the medieval world rose, the flame had spread so widely that it no longer belonged to a single culture. In Spain, Moorish alchemists studied the stars through astrolabes patterned after Babylonian models. In France and Britain, the builders of cathedrals encoded sacred geometry into their Gothic arches, pointed spires that still measured the heavens. To the uninitiated, these were acts of beauty. To the initiates, they were acts of remembrance. Every secret society, every brotherhood, every circle of adepts that would later emerge, the Pythagoreans, the Neoplatonists, the Rosicrucians, the Knights Templar, all traced their ancestry, consciously or not, to this lineage of preservation. Each carried a spark of the old fire. Each rephrased the same truths in the language of its age. The message was always the same, that the universe is a living pattern, that the human being is its reflection, that when man forgets this, the world falls into shadow, and when he remembers, light returns. Even the medieval myth of the Holy Grail may conceal this teaching. The Grail was never a cup, it was knowledge, the vessel that held the essence of the divine. The same vessel once symbolized by the ark, the womb, the temple. To seek the Grail was to seek remembrance, the reunion of heaven and earth. By the dawn of the first millennium, the flame was hidden in labyrinths of symbol, encoded in cathedrals, songs, and stars. Few could read its language. Fewer still could keep it alive. But history, like the cosmos, moves in cycles, and cycles by nature demand return. The light that once illuminated Göbekli Tepe and Eridu could not remain buried forever. It would rise again, first through whispers, then through rediscovery, and finally through revelation. The next age would see that fire burst once more into brilliance, an age of rediscovery, of revival, and of awe. But before the Renaissance could dawn, the world would pass through its longest night. The long night, the dark ages, and the hidden path of light. History remembers this age as dark, a time of plague, war, and ignorance. But darkness is never total. Even in the deepest shadow, a faint glimmer endures. Between the ruins of Rome and the dawn of modernity, that glimmer was the hidden path of light, the underground river of memory that refused to die. When the classical world fell, its libraries burned, and its temples became churches. Yet the flame did not vanish. It changed its language. The old gods put on new names, and the sacred sciences were reborn in disguise. The geometry of the stars became the geometry of cathedrals. The cosmic order of Egypt became the hierarchy of heaven. The alchemists' furnaces replaced the sun temples of old. Europe's first monks believed they were copying Holy Scripture, but many unknowingly preserved fragments of something far older. In the scriptoriums of Ireland, Spain, and Byzantium, they transcribed works of Plato, Ptolemy, and Hermes Trismegistus. Each illuminated letter, each ornate margin, hid symbols of the eternal order: suns, serpents, circles, and trees of life. Through these patient hands, the wisdom of the ancients slipped quietly into the Christian world like a secret seed. Meanwhile, far from the fading West, the flame burned brightly in the Islamic Golden Age. In Baghdad's House of Wisdom, scholars such as Al-Kindi, Al-Hazan, and Al-Tusi translated and expanded the legacy of Greece, Egypt, and Babylon. They measured the heavens, refined geometry, and preserved alchemical treatises, never realizing they were carrying forward echoes of the same science that had once guided the priests of Eridu. In Cordoba, Toledo, and Damascus, libraries overflowed with manuscripts thought lost to time. It was here, in these meeting places of East and West, that the fragments of the old world quietly recombined. To the medieval scholar, knowledge was devotion. To the initiate, devotion was remembrance. Even the alchemists, mocked as dreamers, were in truth the heirs of the world's first builders. Their great work, the transmutation of base metal into gold, was not about chemistry, but consciousness. The furnace symbolized the cosmos. The lead represented matter, the gold, spirit refined through cycles of purification. Each operation reenacted the creation itself, the alchemist playing, in miniature, the role once ascribed to gods. In secret manuscripts like the Tabula Smaragdina, the Emerald Tablet, the old axiom appeared again. That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below, to accomplish the miracle of one thing. The phrase was older than Egypt, older than Sumer, a direct echo of the builders of light. It resurfaced, unchanged, after 6,000 years, proof that the memory had never truly died. Meanwhile, architecture itself became the vessel of remembrance. The Gothic cathedrals that rose across Europe in the 12th and 13th centuries were not only houses of worship, they were books in stone. Their spires pointed to celestial north. Their rose windows mimicked the wheel of the heavens. Each arch, each column, each shadow at solstice was an equation, a harmonic bridge between heaven and earth. The builders called themselves the Companions, later known as Freemasons, inheritors of the ancient art of geometry, though even they had forgotten how ancient it truly was. In the East, the continuity was clearer. The Sufis of Persia spoke of hidden knowledge, ilm al-batin, the inner truth concealed beneath literal scripture. Their whirling dances imitated the movement of the planets around the sun, each motion a meditation on cosmic order. The Taoists of China refined inner alchemy, teaching that the body mirrored the heavens, that balance within created balance without. The Tibetans preserved mandalas, sacred geometries of mind and universe that would later astonish modern mathematicians with their precision. Even in legend, the hidden fire flickered. Stories of the Holy Grail, of knights seeking divine wisdom, of hidden lands across the Western Sea, all were veiled metaphors for the lost age before Mesopotamia, when gods walked among men and the earth mirrored the stars. These tales, sung by troubadours and recorded by monks, kept the dream alive. They were memory disguised as myth. But as centuries passed, Europe began to awaken. Trade reopened routes to the east. Scholars rediscovered Greek texts through Arabic translations. The old symbols began to breathe again. The compass and the astrolabe returned. Artists studied proportion, balance, and light, unknowingly reviving the sacred geometry that had once defined the first temples. The long night was ending. The hidden path of light had endured, and now, as dawn approached, the fire beneath the ashes prepared to erupt once more, not as religion, but as curiosity. The same curiosity that had driven the star watchers of Göbekli Tepe would soon ignite a new age of rediscovery. But before light returns, there is always a final shadow. The Middle Ages would close with both revelation and inquisition, a collision between the old flame and the new order that sought to contain it. Next, Block 15, the Phoenix of Knowledge, the Renaissance, and the Return of the Ancient Light. The Phoenix of Knowledge, the Renaissance and the Return of the Ancient Light. After nearly 1,000 years of night, the first light returned, not from heaven, but from the human mind. It began quietly, in monasteries and workshops, among those who copied old manuscripts without understanding the gods that once breathed within them. Then, suddenly, it spread like dawn over Europe. The world called it Renaissance, the rebirth. But what was being reborn was far older than Greece or Rome. It was the memory of the first age, the geometry of the gods, the fire of the builders, the whisper of the stars. Painters, architects, and philosophers believed they were rediscovering classical beauty, yet beneath their brushes and compasses stirred the same harmonic ratios that once shaped the ziggurats and pyramids. Filippo Brunelleschi's dome in Florence rose like a mathematical hymn to heaven, its curves echoing the proportions of the Great Pyramid. Leonardo da Vinci, with his Vitruvian Man, mapped the human form as microcosm of the universe, man as measure of all things, and Marsilio Ficino, translating the Corpus Hermeticum for the Medici, proclaimed that humanity was a spark of the divine mind, the same truth whispered by the priests of Heliopolis and the sages of Sumer. The phoenix of knowledge had returned, its wings formed of art, science, and philosophy. Every discovery was an act of remembrance. The rediscovery of perspective in painting revived the ancient concept of sacred geometry, vanishing points echoing the horizon of eternity. The invention of the printing press mirrored the ancient desire to immortalize words in stone. Even the birth of modern astronomy through figures like Copernicus was less revolution than recovery. In aligning the Earth around the Sun, Copernicus unknowingly restored a heliocentric truth known to the priests of Ra, who had called the Sun the heart of the world. To the Renaissance mind, knowledge was not separate from spirit. Giordano Bruno saw the cosmos as infinite, filled with suns and worlds, the same cosmic plurality found in the oldest Vedic hymns. He claimed that by understanding the patterns of nature, man could become divine again. For that, he was burned at the stake, another flame feeding the fire of memory. In the laboratories of the alchemists, old symbols stirred. The emerald tablet resurfaced in Latin translations, its cryptic verses inspiring generations of seekers. To Paracelsus, alchemy was not superstition, but a philosophy of balance, the healing of spirit and matter. To Isaac Newton, centuries later, it would become the bridge between mysticism and physics. The old science, long hidden beneath superstition, was finding new language in observation and experiment. Even architecture became invocation. The Renaissance city, with its perfect squares and circles, was a living mandala, order imposed upon chaos, echoing the first act of creation. Temples became cathedrals, pyramids became domes, ziggurats became bell towers. Every line drawn by compass and rule was an unspoken prayer. As above, so below. And across the sea, a new world emerged. When European ships crossed the Atlantic, they believed they were discovering virgin lands. Yet in the jungles of Mesoamerica, they found pyramids aligned with solstices, calendars measuring the precession of the heavens, myths of floods and sky gods. The echo of the first civilization was already there, waiting. It was as though the earth itself had conspired to remind humanity that it had been old before it was young. The thinkers of the age felt this pulse. John Dee, advisor to Elizabeth I, mathematician and mystic, sought to decode the language of angels, perhaps the same celestial code once carved into Göbekli Tepe's stones. Kepler, searching for the music of the spheres, described planetary motion as a symphony, the exact metaphor used by Sumerian priests when speaking of the divine harmony. Galileo, raising his telescope, wrote that studying the stars was reading the mind of God. All were new expressions of the same truth, that the cosmos is not inert, but alive, and that man, in knowing it, becomes part of it. For a moment, it seemed the world might remember everything, but knowledge, once freed, is unpredictable. The same curiosity that rekindled wisdom also kindled ambition. Discovery turned into conquest. Alchemy split into chemistry. Cosmic order fractured into measurable law. The flame, once sacred, began to flicker into utilitarian light. The Renaissance birthed wonder, but also pride, the same pride that had doomed the Tower of Babel. The ancient teachers had warned that wisdom without humility breeds new floods, not of water, but of reason unmoored from spirit. Still, the phoenix had risen, and though its next flight would scorch the old world again, it had already changed humanity forever. The long night was over. The stars were visible once more, not as gods, but as mirrors of the infinite mind. The age of remembrance had begun, yet the deeper the world looked into the heavens, the more it would confront an ancient question: what truly came before us? The age of rediscovery, science, archaeology, and the echo of the forgotten worlds. By the dawn of the 17th century, the Western mind had remade the world in its image. Telescope and microscope had replaced temple and mantra. Observation became creed, proof, the new prayer. But while science rose in triumph, something ancient stirred beneath its foundations, a whisper that refused to die. For in studying the earth, humanity began to unearth itself. The age of rediscovery had begun. At first, the explorers searched for gold and glory. They sailed into unknown oceans, charting continents they believed untouched by civilization. But the jungles and deserts of the world had memories of their own. In Peru, they found temples that dwarfed cathedrals, stones cut with precision beyond explanation. In Mexico, pyramids aligned with stars, echoing geometries first measured on the plains of Anatolia. In Egypt, buried under sand, lay corridors that whispered of mathematics and stars. Everywhere the explorers dug, memory waited. The scientists of this new age believed they were uncovering nature, but nature was uncovering them. The more they measured, the more the universe resembled the ancient myths, a cosmos bound by law, alive with pattern, shaped by rhythm. Newton, the father of modern physics, spent more time studying alchemy and prophecy than motion. He called gravity a divine emanation, the same language the Egyptians had used for Ma'at. For him, the cosmos was not a machine. It was a temple of numbers. And then came the earth itself, speaking through stone. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the young science of archaeology began to rewrite time. When explorers dug beneath the sands of Nineveh and Ur, they found tablets that spoke of kings older than history, kings who ruled before the flood. At first, scholars dismissed them as legend. Then the names appeared again: Alulim, Enmenluana, Ziusudra, the same figures once thought myth. Slowly, myth began to harden into history. Egypt followed. When Champollion deciphered the Rosetta Stone in 1822, 1,000 years of silence broke. The hieroglyphs, once dismissed as mystic nonsense, revealed a language of breathtaking precision, a mathematical, symbolic world where art, science, and religion were one. In its logic, Egypt sounded less like an archaic civilization and more like a remnant of a forgotten science. Each discovery deepened the mystery. Ruins at Tiahuanaco, Pumapunku, and Baalbek displayed engineering that defied contemporary explanation. Blocks weighing hundreds of tons fit together with microscopic precision, as though shaped by forces modern tools could barely replicate. Were these the works of simple masons, or the last echoes of a technology remembered only through myth? The Victorians called them primitive. Yet as they measured the stars, they found alignments too precise for chance. The Great Pyramid pointed to true north with an accuracy modern instruments barely improve upon. The Nazca lines stretched for miles, visible only from the air, forming constellations traced on the desert floor. The stones of Stonehenge marked eclipses with astronomical accuracy. It was as though the whole planet had once spoken a single architectural language, and we were just beginning to decipher it. The deeper the spades dug, the older the world became. Every discovery pushed back the horizon of time. Ice cores, fossils, sediment layers, all hinted that humanity's story stretched far beyond the 6,000 years once allotted to it. And when Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, the revelation struck like thunder. Life itself was ancient, evolving over unimaginable epochs. But even as science expanded time, archaeology complicated it. What if civilization, too, had cycled, rising, falling, and rising again? Some scholars began to suspect that the myths of floods and lost ages might encode real memories of global catastrophe. The Younger Dryas, now known through geological evidence, matched eerily with ancient flood legends. Comet fragments, rising seas, sudden extinctions, all aligned with stories once told around Sumerian fires. The line between myth and history blurred once more. In the 20th century, as technology advanced, humanity finally saw the Earth from above, and the image was familiar. From orbit, the Nile mirrored the Milky Way. The pyramids aligned with Orion's belt. the Andes and Himalayas formed geometric corridors between sacred sites. It was as if the planet itself had been designed, not randomly but rhythmically, in tune with the stars. Modern science called it coincidence, but coincidence is just the name we give to patterns we no longer understand. And so, as archaeologists unearthed temples, scientists unearthed laws, and mathematicians unearthed symmetry, the forgotten world re-emerged, not as superstition, but as memory disguised as discovery. Humanity had once again reached the threshold between knowing and remembering. The compass pointed backward and forward at once. Every discovery was a reflection, the modern world staring into the eyes of its own lost ancestry. Yet one question remained. If civilizations existed before Sumer and Egypt, what caused them to vanish? What force erased their memory so completely that history itself had to be reborn? The answer, as old myths warned, lay not in conquest or decay, but in cataclysm, because the earth, like its children, remembers through destruction. The Great Reset, cataclysms, floods, and the cycles of the earth. Every civilization remembers the end of the world. From the tablets of Sumer to the hymns of India, from the legends of the Maya to the prophecies of the Norse, the same story repeats. The sky darkens, fire rains, waters rise, and the world is remade. These are not metaphors, they are memories, echoes of the Great Reset, when Earth itself became the instrument of forgetting. Modern science, reluctant to see myth as history, now admits what the ancients always knew. Cataclysm is cyclical. The planet breathes in ages, stability followed by upheaval, creation by destruction. And the last of these resets, the one remembered in nearly every culture, occurred at the end of the last ice age, around 12,900 to 9,600 BCE, the epoch geologists call the Younger Dryas. In a single heartbeat of geological time, the world changed. Comet fragments or cosmic debris struck the northern hemisphere, igniting massive fires, melting ice sheets, and flooding continents. Sea levels rose more than 400 feet, drowning coastlines that had been home to countless generations. Species vanished, climates shifted, and the face of the earth was rewritten. But most astonishing was what happened after, the sudden appearance of civilization. As if guided by a buried instinct, humanity rebuilt. Monuments like Göbekli Tepe, Jericho, and Çatalhöyük appeared within centuries of the disaster. Was this coincidence or continuity, survivors rebuilding from memory? To the ancients, it was the wrath of the gods. To modern geology, the planet's natural rhythm. But both agree on one thing. The flood came, and with it, the birth of time. The Sumerian flood tablet, part of the Epic of Gilgamesh, tells of Ziusudra, warned by the gods to build a great boat before a deluge wiped out humankind. The Hebrew Genesis repeats the tale as Noah and the Ark. In India, it is Manu, rescued by a fish who guides his vessel to safety. In Mesoamerica, Cox and his wife survive in a wooden chest as the world drowns. The pattern is universal: survival through remembrance, rebirth through disaster. Perhaps these myths are not stories of one flood, but of many, the recurring pulse of destruction and renewal that shapes both earth and consciousness. Even geology whispers of older cycles. 11,600 years ago, the Younger Dryas melt, marking the end of the last ice age. 23,000 years ago, an earlier warming pulse. 36,000 years ago, another shift, another rising sea. Each roughly mirrors the rhythm of Earth's precessional cycle, 25,120 years, the same cosmic clock the ancients seem to understand. Could the builders of the first temples have encoded these cycles to warn their descendants? Some researchers think so. The vulture stone at Göbekli Tepe, for instance, appears to depict constellations as they looked at the exact moment of the Younger Dryas impact. It may be the oldest scientific record on Earth, not a religious symbol, but a chronicle of catastrophe. The ancients knew what modern minds often forget. Creation and destruction are twins. In Egypt, Osiris is dismembered and reborn. In Babylon, Tiamat's chaos births the cosmos. In Hindu lore, Shiva dances the dance of dissolution and renewal. Each myth is a cycle, a warning and a promise. When the waters receded, survivors would have carried fragments of knowledge, astronomy, geometry, agriculture, to the highlands. Their descendants became the seed-bearers of future civilizations. Every mountain sacred to early people, Ararat, Archaeum, Andes, Himalaya, may have been a memory of refuge during the flood. And though science measures time in strata, myth measures it in scars. Beneath our continents lie drowned landscapes, the Doggerland plains of the North Sea, the Sundaland shelf of Southeast Asia, the Gulf of Khambhat off India's coast, all once dry, all now hidden beneath the sea. If civilization existed before Sumer, its ruins would lie there, under hundreds of feet of water, beyond the reach of memory. Perhaps that is the true meaning of the Great Flood. Not divine punishment, but planetary renewal. A cosmic mechanism ensuring that each age, grown too arrogant, must return to the beginning, must remember through loss. To the ancients, this was not tragedy, but law. The earth cleanses itself so that life can begin again, wiser than before. But in our time, we have forgotten that law. We treat the planet as inert, the heavens as empty, and yet the same cycles continue, slow, patient, inevitable. Every few millennia the axis shifts, every few ages the seas rise, and every time humanity must begin again, a new dawn over the same earth. The Great Reset is not only a memory of the past, it is the heartbeat of the planet, and perhaps the destiny of the species that walks upon it. The hidden map. Traces of lost civilizations beneath the sea. The sea is a library. Every wave that breaks on the shore is a page torn from a history the world has chosen to forget. For when the last ice age ended and the waters rose, they swallowed not only coastlines, they swallowed memory. If the world before Mesopotamia truly existed, its ruins would not lie in deserts or mountains. They would lie beneath the oceans, the drowned heart of humanity's first age. Over the last century, explorers and oceanographers have glimpsed fragments of that hidden map. Near the shores of India, Japan, Cuba, and the British Isles, sonar scans have revealed patterns that should not exist. Geometric structures, aligned terraces, long-forgotten roads. Each discovery erases a little more of the certainty that civilization began in Sumer. Let us begin in the east, the Gulf of Khambhat, off the coast of Gujarat, India. In 2001, marine archaeologists using side-scan sonar detected vast rectilinear formations stretching for miles beneath 120 feet of water. Carbon samples retrieved from the site dated to nearly 9,500 BCE, the very threshold of the post-flood world. Artifacts hinted at advanced settlement, pottery, tools, and human remains embedded in submerged riverbeds. Officially, skepticism reigned. Yet the images remain. Perfect grids, parallel lines, a ghost city lost beneath the Arabian Sea. Could this have been a memory of Manu's world, the civilization the Vedic hymns recall before the deluge? Further east, near the Ryukyu Islands of Japan, divers stumbled upon the Yonaguni Monument, a massive sandstone formation shaped into terraces, stairways, and plazas. Some call it natural geology, others evidence of pre-Ice Age architecture. Its angular precision, right angles, and megalithic features suggest intention, or at least the guiding hand of intelligence. If man carved it, it would be over 10,000 years old, rewriting the map of civilization entirely. Across the globe, on the other side of the Atlantic, another enigma waits. Off the coast of Cuba, in the deep waters between Havana and the Yucatan Peninsula, Canadian researchers in 2000 detected symmetrical structures nearly half a mile beneath the surface. The sonar images revealed pyramidal shapes, avenues, and geometrically aligned foundations covering several square kilometers. The formations lie at depths that would have been dry land 12,000 years ago, precisely when the seas rose during the Younger Dryas floods. In the North Sea, Scientists mapping the seabed have uncovered remnants of an ancient land known as Doggerland, once a fertile plain connecting Britain to continental Europe. Beneath layers of sediment lie river channels, tools, and even traces of human settlements. The area was swallowed by the sea around 6000 BCE, its people likely witnesses to the rising tides that inspired later flood myths. To them, the world did not end. It drowned. The pattern continues. Off the coast of Malta, massive stone blocks and underwater temples hint at a time when the island was part of a larger landmass, its ruins predating known construction in the region. In Bimini, in the Bahamas, a formation of perfectly laid limestone blocks, the so-called Bimini Road, extends underwater like a highway into nothingness. To skeptics, they are coincidence. To others, evidence of a forgotten metropolis, perhaps even a memory of Atlantis itself. The Atlantean myth, preserved through Plato, speaks of a mighty island beyond the Pillars of Heracles, destroyed by flood in a single day and night of misfortune. Modern readers treat it as allegory, yet its details mirror geological events from the same epoch, the abrupt end of the last ice age, when rising seas devoured islands across the Atlantic basin. Whether Atlantis was a single city or a symbolic memory of a global event, its story resonates with every discovery now surfacing from the deep. Technology has begun to confirm what myth has always whispered. High-resolution bathymetric mapping, satellite altimetry, and submersible exploration reveal ancient coastlines now hundreds of feet below modern seas. From the Bay of Bengal to the Caribbean, sonar traces show patterns too regular for chance. Some align with celestial coordinates, as though ancient engineers once built along meridians known long before modern navigation. Could it be that the cradles of civilization we know, Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, were merely aftershocks of an older, ocean-bound world? A maritime network lost to the tides, whose survivors carried fragments of knowledge inland to rebuild what they could remember? The evidence suggests not one lost civilization, but many, scattered nodes of an ancient global culture erased by rising waters. Each coastal ruin, each drowned terrace, each inexplicable monument is a footprint of that vanished world. And perhaps that is why nearly every creation myth begins with water, the primordial abyss, the flood, the sea of chaos. For the sea is both womb and tomb, the destroyer and the keeper. It erases all, but it also preserves. Somewhere beneath its waves, the stones of humanity's first home still sleep, waiting for us to remember. But if the past is buried under the sea, the question remains, who were they? What kind of people could build with such precision, measure the stars with such understanding, and vanish so completely? To answer that, we must look not beneath the ocean, but within ourselves, into the genetic and mythic inheritance of the species. Because perhaps the lost civilization never disappeared. Perhaps it survived within us. The inheritance of the gods, genetic memory, and the legacy of the first people. Every civilization ends, but humanity endures. Empires vanish, languages die, monuments crumble, yet the human form, the human mind, continues. What if memory itself is not only cultural but biological? What if, beneath the skin, we still carry the data of forgotten ages, the very blueprint of the first people? For centuries, myth and religion spoke of divine creation, gods shaping mankind in their image. Modern genetics, in its own way, confirms that story. Each of us is a living archive containing the history of every ancestor who ever walked the earth. In the double helix of DNA, the spiral that mirrors galaxies and shells, lies a record billions of years deep, an unbroken chain stretching from the first cell to the last dawn. Within that code, perhaps, echoes remain of civilizations too old for archaeology to trace. Scientists call it epigenetic memory, the idea that experiences, traumas, even learned behaviors can leave chemical marks that pass to descendants. Myth calls it ancestral memory, the instinctive knowledge of things we have never lived. Both describe the same mystery, the persistence of information through time. Could it be that the legends of lost ages are not only stories told, but memories felt? Across the world, people dream the same archetypes: floods, fires, towers, winged beings, serpents of wisdom. Carl Jung called these images the collective unconscious, a psychic inheritance carried by all humanity. But perhaps they are more literal than he imagined, emotional residues of real cataclysms, encoded in us when the world itself was young. Consider how universal our symbols are. The spiral, from petroglyphs in Ireland to temples in Peru, mirrors both the shape of galaxies and of our own DNA. The serpent, sacred in Sumer, Egypt, Mesoamerica, and India, embodies transformation, rebirth, and the coiling of life energy. The tree, the axis mundi, the world pillar, connects heaven, earth, and underworld. These images are older than any language. They are neural fossils, the first stories the human brain ever told itself. And perhaps they are not metaphor, but memory, the symbols of a civilization that encoded its knowledge into nature itself. Modern genetics has revealed something astonishing. All humans share a common maternal ancestor, the so-called mitochondrial Eve, who lived roughly 150,000 to 200,000 years ago. From her descend every person alive. But anthropologists have found signs of genetic bottlenecks, moments when humanity nearly vanished, perhaps during past cataclysms. Each reset compressed our diversity, yet preserved the essence of what we were. If knowledge can be inherited through instinct, then each new age is not a blank slate. It is a continuation, a quiet remembering. Ancient texts seem to know this. The Sumerians wrote of the Anunnaki shaping mankind to carry the image and knowledge of the gods. The Egyptians spoke of the Ka and Ba, spiritual doubles transmitting wisdom through bloodlines. The Hebrews of Adamah, the red clay infused with divine breath. In every version, humans are hybrids of matter and memory, clay and starlight. Even our myths of divine teachers, the Apkallu, Thoth, Quetzalcoatl, may reflect not literal gods, but human lineages that carried the old knowledge across the flood. They were the carriers of the code, both biological and intellectual, ensuring that the flame of civilization could be reignited when the earth was ready. And when we look into ourselves, our art, our mathematics, our unending fascination with the stars, we see their imprint. Why do we instinctively seek pattern? Why does symmetry please us, rhythm move us, light compel us? Because deep within ourselves, we remember the universe that birthed us. The geometry of the cosmos is not learned. It is recognized. Modern science, through the Human Genome Project, now describes DNA as a language of 4 letters, an alphabet written across 3 billion lines. Each sequence is an instruction, a phrase, a poem of creation. The ancients once said, "In the beginning was the Word." Perhaps they meant exactly this, that life itself is text, the earth's sacred scripture written in code. If the first civilization truly existed, it may not have passed down monuments alone. It may have encoded its essence into the only indestructible medium available, life itself. We are its living artifacts. Every time we innovate, explore, or dream of worlds beyond, we act out that inheritance. The divine curiosity of beings who once measured the stars before they had names, the instinct to build, to align, to seek harmony. These are not cultural traits. They are ancient reflexes, written in the spiral that defines us. Perhaps this is what the myths of the gods always meant, that the divine did not merely visit the earth, it became human, and in doing so, it ensured that even if every temple crumbled, every record burned, every city drowned, the memory of creation would survive in the flesh of its children. We are the archive and the archaeologists both. But if the legacy of the first people lives within us, then the question changes. What happens when humanity finally remembers, fully, consciously, what it has always been? What happens when the spiral of evolution completes one full turn and meets its beginning again? The circle closes, the awakening of memory and the future of the human story. The story of humanity has never been a straight line. It is a spiral, a golden curve tracing its way through ice and fire, through flood and rebirth, through forgetting and remembrance. Each turn brings us closer not to new discoveries, but to old truths rediscovered. We began as wanderers beneath ancient skies, fearing thunder and chasing fire. Then we built monuments to the stars, believing the gods lived there. Then we forgot. Then we remembered. And now, in the age of satellites and microscopes, we have come full circle, looking again to the heavens, asking the same question our ancestors carved into stone. Where did we come from? For centuries, we have sought the answer in distant galaxies, in the dust of Mars, in the data of telescopes. But perhaps the answer has always been here, not out there, but within. Because to remember who we are is not to find new worlds, but to realize that we were never separate from the old one. The scientists of today measure what the priests once intuited, that the universe is not chaos, but pattern. From the swirl of galaxies to the coil of DNA, from the rhythm of the tides to the beat of the human heart, everything moves in harmonic proportion. Modern physics calls it symmetry. The ancients called it divinity. What they described as gods, we describe as forces. What they worshipped as sacred geometry, we now call mathematics. But the awe, the wonder that the cosmos is alive, intelligent, purposeful, has never changed. It is the same fire burning behind every age, the same light reflected in every eye. Maybe the first civilization was never just a society of stone and metal. Maybe it was a state of mind, a consciousness attuned to the harmony between matter and spirit, earth and sky. Its temples were not merely buildings, they were metaphors for human awareness. When the flood came, that consciousness did not die. It retreated inward, waiting for its descendants to awaken again. And now, for the first time in 12,000 years, humanity stands on the same threshold. We have mapped the earth, walked on the moon, split the atom, and read the code of life itself. We are once again the sky teachers, wielders of creation's tools. But the question remains the same one that echoed through Göbekli Tepe's stones. Will we use this power to harmonize with the cosmos, or to repeat the cycle of pride that once drowned the world? The ancients would say, the answer depends on remembrance, for only by remembering can knowledge become wisdom. When you look at the night sky, you are seeing the same constellations the builders of the first temples saw, the same Sirius that rose above Göbekli Tepe, the same Orion that guided the pharaohs, the same Milky Way reflected in the Nile, the Ganges, and the Andes. We gaze at it now through telescopes, but what we truly seek is not the stars. It is the memory of having once belonged among them. Perhaps that is why humanity's greatest stories, from Eden to Atlantis to the heavens themselves, all end with return. Not escape, not conquest, return. The circle is closing. Our myths were never false. They were maps. Our temples were never primitive. They were equations. Our ancestors were never ignorant. They were remembering what we are only now beginning to rediscover, that the universe is one vast consciousness, experiencing itself through time. The first civilization is not lost. It lives in the pattern of our thoughts, in the rhythm of our art, in the very spiral of our DNA. Every dream of transcendence, every longing for harmony, every question we ask of the stars is a signal, the pulse of an ancient intelligence beating within the human heart. And perhaps, as we awaken to this truth, we become once more what we were always meant to be. Not the last generation of an ancient race, but the next generation of its memory. The builders of Göbekli Tepe carved their sky into stone so we would not forget. Now we carve ours into code and circuitry, sending our voices beyond the stars. The same prayer, the same curiosity, the same promise. The circle closes, but every ending is a beginning. And somewhere, Beyond the veil of time, the first ones watch, not as gods, but as ancestors, waiting for us to remember fully who we are. Because the story of humanity has never been about origins. It has always been about return.